Okay, so it's been a while since I've worked on this project. The most common request was how to prevent repeat questions. Now, one of the reasons why I hadn't addressed this before was because I figured if you had a large enough population or pool of questions, then then a duplicate would be very unlikely simply due to random chance. Because if, say, you had a pool of 200 or 300 questions, it was unlikely that you get a repeat. However, if you're using this for professional purposes and you want to make absolutely certain that you do not get a repeat, then I certainly understand the need for that. So, partly because I haven't worked on this project in a while, and partly because the coding is a little bit more slippery than what I'd like, let me do a quick overview of how this is going to work, and then we'll get into the coding. I usually don't do it that much. I usually do them at the same time. So, we need to have, in general terms, a repository that stores all the random numbers that have been generated because each random number represents a question. So we need to store each and every one of those when they're selected. And then when a new random number is generated, before the question is asked, it has to be checked to that list. So first time through, the random number is generated, dropped into that list, and that's fine. But starting with the second time, you now want to check that first value to make sure you haven't used it. And the third time, you want to check the first and second number. And the fourth time, you want to check the first, second, and third number. So you have this ever-increasing population of questions that have already been asked. And you want to make sure that when you roll a new number, a new random number, it hasn't been used before. So that's the overview. And I already kind of tipped my hand as far as how we're going to do it because rather than saying repository, I accidentally said list. So as often the case, you don't have to really introduce that much of a new functionality to it so much as recycle something you've already used. We've already demonstrated that a list can store lots of values. So the idea is you're going to create a list that you don't just read from, but you also write to. So you're going to create a list, and with every random number, the random number gets put into the list, or rather it's checked first to make sure it hasn't come up. If it hasn't come up, then it's put into the list. Now, because of technical limitations, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new list, but it's going to have a bunch of placeholder values. So again, since this is a little bit slippery, I'm going to a text file and I'm just going to copy and paste rather than typing it out. I will still explain all of it, of course. So there we go. We have a list and it's the same format. It's the word list, then what type of variable? It's an int in this case. This is the name of the variable. Sorry, just fixing an issue with the next line that we'll get to in a moment. So the word list, what type of variable? It's an int. This is the name of the variable. Again, you want variables that are representative of what they are. This is storing the previous questions. New list, int, parentheses. And like I said, these are just placeholder values. If you don't put placeholder values here, then you have to put in a separate line to declare how big the list is, so it's just easy enough to put in the placeholder values. Why -1? Because -1 never comes up because the random number is choosing the question. So we've got position 0, position 1, position 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. We don't have a -1. So that way you can carve out how many positions you want, and you can use a value that you know will never actually come up. Okay, so we've created our list. This is going to be the repository for storing our random numbers as they get generated. This is going to be used to be the marker to say which position the number needs to be put into. So the first random number needs to be put into the first position. The second random number, if it's not here already, needs to be put into the second position. The third random number, if it's not in here already, needs to be put into the third position, and on and on and on. But again, it doesn't get added to the list until the list has been checked for that random number. So I know that might sound a little bit messy. Don't worry, we're getting to it. So we're going to store the numbers in the list, and this is being used as the marker to say which position we're on. So public int question number equals 0. So what question number are you on? Now you could say, hey Mike, isn't that kind of like total questions? It is, and the only reason why I created a new variable is because this is a float, and it being a float was necessary, I believe, to make the calculations work. But for this to work, it needed to be an int. So it's similar, but it needed to be int for this to work. So we created our list and we created our pointer. Now, and if I didn't mention it, we're in text control. So if random question is equal to -1, this is where the random number is generated. And that random number corresponds to a value up here. So what would happen is random question would be equal to -1. A random number is generated. Since random question is no longer equal to -1, this gets executed. Therefore, between this and this is where you have to do the check. So we don't want random question to be greater than -1. We want to set it back to -1 if it's a repeat. So how do we do that? I usually write this one line at a time. I'm just going to copy and paste it, but I'll explain it one line at a time, though. Okay, so within random question is equal to -1, we generate our random number. But now we have to see if that random number has been used. So what we do is we're going to use a for statement. What the for statement does is it creates a loop. It creates a cycle that gets repeated as long as certain conditions are being met. So let's look at those conditions. We're saying that this is a variable and that it's an int and that it's equal to 0. So basically we're declaring a variable. So int variable I, so I is an int type of variable. It starts at 0, semicolon. So long as I is less than 22. So I less than 22 is saying that if I is less than 22, then increment I. So this variable starts at 0. If it's less than 22, then increment it. That's what plus plus means. That's a very old way of coding. If you ever use the original C to increment a variable by 1, you'd put in C. You'd put in the name of the variable and then plus plus. That's why C++ is called C++. Because it's saying it's C incremented by 1. It's the next iteration of C. So a little trivia there. C++ is called that because that's how you do an increment in C. Okay, so I is going to, so everything in these brackets will be repeated as long as I is between 0 and 22 inclusive. So what gets repeated? Well, it's an if statement. It says if random question, so our random question, is not equal. That's what the exclamation means before the equal sign. It means not. So if random question is not equal to previous questions, so previous questions is that repository we created. And now you have to check each and every other position. So you can't just check the first position. You need to check the first, and then the second, and the third. So if you really want to do this right, this would actually be a variable. But you know something? It made it much messier, and I didn't want to do that to you guys. So technically, this really should be a variable that tracks how many questions have been asked. It's not really necessary. Since we already carved out the positions and we used a variable that is not a random number, no harm, no foul. So yes, technically, this should be a variable that scales with each and every question. But like I said, I didn't want to do that to you guys. So we're just going to check. There's 22 values in here, so we're just going to check them every single time. With a game that's this small, this resource, it's not resource intensive, it's not going to harm anything. So if random question is not equal to any of the values in this question, do nothing. That's going to look a little bit weird, but it works. Now, if random question does equal, because this is saying if it doesn't equal, so that means else is if it does equal. So if random question is equal to one of the values within that list, then go ahead and set random question back to -1. So in other words, it doesn't break out of this. That was the whole point. We said that once you've checked this list, if the random question number that you've generated is in there, you don't want to use it. How do you not use it? Well, you set this back to -1. Because by setting it back to -1, this doesn't happen. Because it has to be greater than -1. So as a quick recap, you generate your number like you always did, but now you create a range to search. This is basically the pointer. It's saying if the random question is not equal to any value in that new list, then do nothing. Just keep going. Because we already have this set to the value that will make this happen. It's only if that value is found in the list, then go ahead and change this back. So again, like I said, it's really kind of messy. It's a little bit icky to look at. It's a little bit icky to explain. But again, big picture, you're generating a value. You're comparing it to a list. If it's not in the list, you drop it into the list and continue like you normally would. So 2 things left. So this is what gets executed if your random number has been assigned. So previous question, this is the list. Question number, as I said, that's going to be the pointer, is equal to random question. So in other words, previous question, this is our list. The random number that you've generated is going to be dumped into here. Which also means this number needs to increment, or else it will keep dumping it into the same place. And that brings us to the last part. Oops. So right along with these other two, question number plus equals 1. So in other words, question number, the pointer that is traveling along here to say which position the random number is going to be saved into, has to be incremented by 1. And again, we're just recycling concepts that we already used. But rather than just reading, we are reading and then writing to that list. So again, my apologies, this is messier than my normal explanations, but there's really just, it's not that simple to explain, unfortunately. So that should do it. So let's save it. We have. And there should be no repeats. So France, Paris, Germany, Berlin, Mexico, Mexico City, Brazil, Brasilia, Cuba, Havana, and now it cannot progress. See, because every single number has been used. And there you go. So that's it. That's what people have been asking for. They wanted to be able to track all the questions that have been asked. Again, I wish I could have explained it a little bit clearer. I haven't done a video for Unity in a few weeks or even a month, so I'm a little rusty at the explanation. But again, in short, you're creating a new list. You check that list for your random question number that is generated. If it's not in there, you dump it into there, and then you proceed as normal. But if it is in there, then you just generate a new random question. So that should do it. If you have any questions, just let me know.